we did a study of the organization, and we found that the average inside sales rep was 10 years older than their actual biological age. Their physical age was 10 years older. And that the average inside sales rep gained 15 to 20 pounds inside of their first month because they were tethered to the phones, they were sedentary, they were being metric to the minute, they were being fed junk food. And I knew this firsthand because that's how I started at Dell, and the same thing happened to me. I had disconnected myself from my emotions to survive. So I was kind of operating from here up because I thought that was the professional thing to do. But what I didn't realize is I'd kind of completely cut myself off from my heart, and that was starting to have an impact on my relationships, not just at work, but outside of work. And it was also impeding my ability to make good decisions because you need emotions to make decisions. The only way I can describe it is I felt called to serve humanity. And that sounds kind of like a strange thing to say, but I felt like deeply moved to help others in a really meaningful way. And especially in this polarized world that we live in, I feel very passionately about the fact that we must come together. We need to keep talking.
Welcome back to the Revenue Dilemma podcast. This show is about unlocking growth and challenging the status quo to uncover the strategies and tactics that shape company transformations and breakthroughs. Today's conversation is all about what really drives sustainable growth and why so many companies are stuck in fear-based, outdated ways of working. My guest today is Carla Piñeyro Sublett. She's a former CMO of IBM, National Instruments, and Rackspace, and she's now known as the Reluctant Coach. She's led multi-billion-dollar transformations, driven double-digit growth in companies that were shrinking, and now helps executives at the highest level think about breakthroughs and leading differently. Carla and I go way back, walk and talks, conversations on the phone, trading notes on leadership. And at one point, she even says I saved her podcast by connecting her with the producer that we now both use for our podcasts. And that just tells you the kind of friend and leader she is. Humble, and always willing to give credit. My favorite part of this episode is when she shares what happened the very first day she walked into Rackspace. It was an all-time leadership stress test that could have broken most people. And how she responded is pure Carla and says everything about her approach to growth and leadership. In this episode, we dive into why most organizations are still run on outdated, fear-driven energy, how creating a culture of inquiry unlocks real transformation. We'll hear stories from Dell, Rackspace, IBM, and National Instruments that prove growth can come from putting people and customers first, and why disrupting toxicity is the hidden unlock for leaders today. So let's jump in. Here's my conversation with Carla Piñeyro Sublett. Well, as I was preparing for the conversation, it gave me an opportunity to kind of revisit what I already knew, which is you have this incredible background, obviously, professionally, personally, things that you're doing in the community, and what an incredible body of work, what an incredible set of experiences, and now the work that you're doing as the Reluctant Coach. And so I'm curious, given what you've seen along the way, and now with the finger on the pulse of what you're doing behind the scenes, what do you think is the biggest barrier to growth right now in organizations that everyone is feeling, but maybe not talking about?
Yeah, I love this question because we could talk about all the things that everybody is talking about, and I'm just going to go straight to it. People are not talking about the fact that we've been running businesses in a dated and toxic way, and that fear and anxiety does not contribute to growth. And it's the way businesses have been run as long as I can remember. So when people aren't making their number, they ratchet up the pressure, right? You and I have both experienced it. And I actually feel very differently. I feel like when environments are safe, when people love one another, that's really when businesses thrive. That's really when businesses grow. So no one's talking about the health of an organization, the health of its people, and they're talking about all the symptoms, the fact that they can't get people back in the office, the fact that they've lost their culture, the fact that attrition is at an all-time high. But they're not talking about, for me, the root issue, which is the way we've been running businesses is totally dated.
So why do you think that is? What's holding us back from bringing that conversation to light and making change? Like, why do you think it continues to run that way?
Ooh, this is where I get myself into trouble,
Oh.
Tony. We're going to do this right now, aren't we?
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to use some language that's probably going to be triggering to people, but I just want to say that I'm not referring to gender, I'm referring to energy. And that is that the way business has been run has been overtly masculine.
Mm.
and it has been about hunt and kill and fear and pressure. And I've been one of those people. I've been one of those leaders that ratchets up the pressure on my organization. Um, but I am here to tell you that, again, the most success I've seen has been when my teams feel like they're safe and when they can bring problems to me and to each other, and when they can challenge each other and not fear for the loss of their jobs. And that's when organizations really thrive. And I think it just got out of balance. And I think it accelerated post COVID. I think it accelerated as businesses started to struggle with growth, and you started to see these environments that were just full of fear and anxiety. And it started to reflect in the physical health of their sales organizations, their marketing organizations. People started to quiet quit. And I think that's the conversation that people aren't having, which is how do you really create an organization where people are thriving and enjoying themselves so that they are doing their best work. And if you think about your time as a coach, if your teams weren't feeling well, if you were constantly putting the pressure on them, if you weren't letting them rest, if you weren't taking care of them, if you weren't nurturing them, if you weren't inspiring them, how would they have performed?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, part of what my experience has been is part of what leads people there is it's sort of this cascading, the proverbial like shit's rolling downhill and no
Exactly.
one's, taking a step back and putting up the umbrella and saying, wait a second, like there might be a better way to do this. But it's also just easier to operate that way. It takes less sophistication, less work.
Yeah.
Like that's been my experience. But what's been your experience on why that cycle isn't stopped or why people aren't taking a step back and figuring out how to create the space to create the conditions that you're talking about?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you what it looks like maybe, and that'll help. I think sometimes in organizations people know no other way. So they've been
Mm,
working a certain way for decades. So you and I have probably, and I'm speaking for you, I'm
yeah,
projecting, so call me
yeah,
out if this isn't true. But, how many meetings have you been in where you're preparing for a board meeting and there's like 10 meetings to prepare for the board meeting and you're working on the deck and you're working it just to prepare for the board meeting, and it's like work about work about work, you know and everybody's checking everybody's work. What if that time was actually spent with
yeah,
customers,
yeah,
right, instead of presenting internally?
yes,
And I've worked in organizations of hundreds of thousands of people where the bulk of the activity, week in and week out, the bulk of the hours is being spent building decks to present up to the organization, to manage up to the organization. And a fraction of the time is being spent on customers and solving
yeah,
customer problems. And so that's for me an example. And I think honestly, Tony, people know no other way. And some of these roles, when I would come in and be like, wait a minute, we're not meeting 30 hours a week to build decks. There's actually a moment where the organization grieves it because they realize they've been working in a way in which they didn't have to, and that they were wasting their time. And there's also some parts of the organization that fear the loss of their jobs because that's how they asserted their value, was building these great decks and
yeah,
being able to manage up.
yeah. Yeah. No, that is so telling. I felt that pain in several situations and scenarios where you're just spending more time in a room talking to each other
Hmm.
and talking inside the business and staring at those decks and those PowerPoints and not enough time talking to customers or dealing, building product or figuring out what's really going on. So take me then to like, let's say you said that you were in that mode. And by the way, that, I was a coach in a prior life. And there's this saying in coaching that everyone is essentially coaching 40 years in the past, because what you or I would do coaching our kids in their sports and little league or whatever, we're coaching 20 years in the past because we're doing what our coach did when
Exactly.
we were growing up, and that coach was doing what their coach did 20 years before that. So we're all coaching 40 years in the past. And you're saying there's a little bit of that going on.
Oh,
We've sort of
yeah.
seen this happen around us, and we just assume that that's the way this is supposed to work.
Totally. And I mean, imagine, Tony, I've worked in environments that are multi-generational,
Yeah,
where
yeah,
people's grandparents and parents have worked,
yeah,
right? So not only have they been taught by their organizations, they've been taught by their family to think and act that way
yeah.
in the workplace.
Yeah. So when you made that shift personally, because you said, you went through a bout of operating that way and then probably realized that wasn't the path to create the kind of conditions you wanted to create, what were some of the early or first changes you had to make? And maybe run us through a couple examples of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the big unlock for me, quite frankly, was creating a culture of inquiry. and starting to ask questions versus talking at people. So deck creation and managing up is a lot of talking at people. Creating environments where people could ask questions and feel safe asking questions or challenge things or bringing problems to the table was a big one. And it started actually with the market. So when I was at Rackspace, the day I was set to start at that company, or the Friday before I was set to start on a Monday, it leaked to the press that the company was trying to sell, and the stock cratered overnight, and the board fractured, and the company fractured like kids of divorced parents. And it was like there was one camp that was like, we need to protect our core business, and there was another camp that was like, if you can't beat them, join them. We need to go to AWS. And I got there and I was like, okay, we just need to ask our customers what the hell is going on. And we need to ask our founders why they created this company. And we need to ask our engineers what problems they're solving most. And we need to ask analysts what they're seeing in the market. And Tony, I'll be damned. I mean, 3 weeks of doing that, I revealed the answer. And it basically told us, look, everybody, it was during the time of cloud adoption, and everybody was saying, the cloud is easy, it's agile, it'll cure cancer, it'll grow your business. But no one was actually saying what was really going on, which was CEOs and actually CIOs and CTOs were scared shitless because they weren't ready to migrate, but their organizations already had. And in most instances, they had 6 cloud instances within their organizations because people were spinning them up on credit cards. And so they were worried. They were worried for their jobs. They were worried for security. They were worried about costs that were inflating. And we as a company were uniquely positioned because we had 5,000 cloud engineers. So instead of focusing them on our core business, we decided, wait a minute, we'll just train them on every cloud instance. So we'll get them certified in AWS. We'll get them certified in Azure and Google and all the above. And then we'll offer them up to manage our customers' clouds under single pane of glass. And that pivot was actually what got us back to growth and actually got us sold, which was the end in mind.
That's so interesting. It's like you were able, through creating that culture of inquiry, to figure out what the real problem that was trying to be solved or needed to be solved, what was trying to happen that wasn't happening. It sounds like the CTO was stuck and probably in self-preservation mode because there was a thing happening before they were ready for it. And you guys were helping them through that journey.
Yeah.
That's super, super interesting.
Yeah, that's astute of you. Yeah. I mean, and there were lots of people stuck. I mean, I get it. You know, if you see success, they had an incredible run. They had years of doubling year after year after year. When you see that kind of success, it's hard to pivot, you know?
Yeah.
It's kind of scary to pivot.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to go deeper into some other examples and scenarios where you've dealt with that kind of transformation and going to drive that. But before we go there, I do want to dip in a bit into where you are today, right now in this moment, because I was fully expecting, as we'd go on our walks over the last couple of years, that you were going to slot right back into the next big job that had all this gnarly stuff going on that you'd have to go figure out. And you didn't do that and decided to take a different route and a different path. What is that? What path are you on right now?
Yeah, you and me both.
Yeah, exactly.
I totally thought that was what was going to happen. You and I have been leading parallel lives for a while, and so I totally thought that was going to happen until it didn't. And it was, I experienced a real dark night of the soul, Tony, because I was like, well, shit, if I'm not a big corporate executive, what am I? What am I in the world? And a lot of people were coming to me for coaching, and I was doing it for free. It's basically just helping everyone, much like you do. And, with a heart of service. And increasingly, it was taking more and more of my time. And then people started to ask me to formalize it. So, and that was the actual language, like, hey, we need to formalize this. And so I reluctantly became a coach. And I don't even know if coach is the right word, Tony, because what I do is pretty different. It's pretty unique. But I'm working with several C-level individuals right now, and it's super rewarding. I had no idea how much I was going to love it. And, you and I both talk about how much people mean to us and developing, how much we get out of elevating people. And to be able to do that full time has meant so much to me.
What has been most rewarding about it, do you think?
There's validation in it. I mean, I got a call from a CEO. I was coaching their CRO, and I got a call from a CEO, and he was like, I don't know what you've done, but it's amazing. You have superpowers. It's incredible. This person is operating the best they ever have. They've done a 180 from a mindset shift. And that person changed their life. They didn't just change how they were operating at work, they changed their life. And so for me, that was just, it was just so fulfilling.
Yeah. Yeah. What is it that you miss about having the big job with
Yeah.
all that responsibility? Because you're getting this helper's high and
Yeah.
and getting this feedback back in now. But what is it that you miss about the
Yeah.
other
I
side?
miss the game of business. I
Mm,
miss being in there. We talked about growth being my drug of
yeah.
choice. I miss driving the strategy, like being the one to make the big decisions and then getting everybody fired up about it to bring it down to ground and building the plan to bring it down to ground. I miss having a big team. I miss that environment. I miss coming into the routine, coming into the same place every day because there's a lot of context switching when you're working with different companies. But there are also a lot of things I don't miss. And, I don't miss back-to-back meetings from 7 in the morning until 7 at night, you know? I don't miss calls across, multiple time zones. There are things I don't miss living on a plane, um, or not being in control of my own calendar.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember talking to you as you were ramping in at IBM, and I may get this number completely wrong, but it was something like you had scheduled 4,400 one-on-ones or something in the first several months. Well, I might be getting that data wrong, but I was like, "This is insanity." You were talking to people from 7 AM to 7 PM
Yeah.
or longer. Anyways, say a little more about that, like, yeah.
Yeah, the meetings were crazy. That was
Yeah.
definitely a meeting culture, and that was like, "Whoa," that was one of my first observations, like, "This is not sustainable." Um We need actual time to work and to think. But no, what I did at IBM, I'm actually extremely proud of. I met with over 11,000 people, and the way we did that was actually through AI,
Mm,
and we held Zoom meetings with organizations, with teams and organizations, and sometimes there would be 50, 100, 250 people on a call. I would prepare them with the same 3 questions in advance. So, what stands in the way of our growth? What do we need to leapfrog the competition? And what are a couple of things that we can do to reduce bureaucracy and to make things easier? And it was really fun because I got to know the personalities of each of the organizations based on how they answered the questions, based on some of them prepared a certain way to answer them. Some of them did it popcorn style, some were more organic and laid back, some were like made it fun and like a sketch. And so it was really entertaining and enlightening. And then the other thing that happened, Tony, is, and I did this not just in marketing, I did this in the sales organization with ops, with research. Um, then we used AI to collate all the answers. And what was really crazy is the organization gave me the answers. It was almost like
mm.
exactly what we did at Rackspace with the market, but the organization gave me the answers. And then we began to implement it, and it was wild because we saw our first growth quarter in 10 years.
Wow. Wow. How did you, prioritize where to start? So you got some of the answers, but I'm sure there was more than one,
Yeah.
and probably some really good ones. How do you prioritize where to start early, especially?
Yeah. Because we used AI, yes, we got a lot of answers, but what it also did is it scored the answers or brought the most frequent answers up to the top. And Tony, it was honestly like 3 things we had to go do. It was like super straightforward. And it was interesting because the next step was for me to actually go back to the organization and be like, okay, I held an all hands with all those people. And I said, this is what you told me. I'm going to go do it. Am I right? I just want to validate this. And the feedback that I got was incredible back from the organization. People were like, "Oh my God, thank you for listening." Even though it wasn't easy to hear, what I had to say wasn't easy to hear. And then I went to my peers and to the executives across the company and said, "Okay, this is what I learned, and this is what the organization told me. They have validated it. I'm now going to go do this unless anyone stops me." And it was super super powerful. It was a really fast way to ramp. But again, it's that culture of inquiry and helping people feel comfortable to speak their minds.
And in that case in particular, was it more of a transformation in terms of steering or moving or pointing the ship in a different direction, or maybe more being a catalyst to get certain things happening that weren't happening? A little bit of both. What was the body of work? What was the nature or context of the work? Massive transformation, more catalyst, more maybe challenger of status quo? What did that sort of look like?
I definitely think it was challenger of status quo.
Mm.
And I think it was catalyst, which led to massive transformation. And a lot of that work is being felt now, years later. And I was recently on the phone with my replacement, and he was like, "Man, thank you for doing that work." And so it was, it wasn't easy work, but it had to be done.
So for me, and someone who's operated at the level that I have, which is much smaller organizations, obviously than you've been at in key leadership roles around, it's really hard for me to wrap my head around how you drive that kind of transformation and change, or catalyze and challenge the status quo at that scale. Um, and here you have a replacement who's thanking you for putting that work in. What did you do specifically, and how did you do it at that scale? I understand if it's 20 of us in a room and we just sort of walk in and give a good speech and move on, but say a little more about that, because
Yeah.
it's hard for me to understand.
Yeah, I need to be careful. I don't know how much detail
Yeah.
I can go
Yeah.
into,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I can say that I significantly reduced the size of the organization.
Mm.
And they just told me flat out, we're too big. We're tripping all over each other. We have a massive budget, but it's being split thousands of ways. And I actually don't understand the difference between my job and this person's job and that person's job and that person's job and the 12 other people that have a similar job title that are all fighting for the same budget. And I actually had people thank me when I said, "Okay, you guys told me the organization was too big. You know what that means, right?" And people were like, "Yes, and thank you for listening."
Yeah. And so what was the process of you just getting people on board with decisions you had to make, getting them in alignment and working towards, that direction you had to go? Again, at that scale, how do you do that?
Yeah.
Just had the how, not even
Yeah.
the what, but
Now, I'll also
yeah,
say I'm not
yeah,
there anymore, and I'm not there
yeah,
anymore for a reason.
yeah.
So that was also a learning for me,
Mm,
Tony, because there was extreme hubris on my part to go into a company that was over 115 years old and think that I was going to be able to drive the amount of change that I drove in the time frame that I was driving it.
mm,
And I'll never forget it because I was meeting with a CMO, a peer from another very large company. And she's like, "How's it going? How have your first 6 months gone?" And I was like, "Amazing. This is what we've done. And this is what we've done. And this is what we've done." And her eyes were getting bigger and bigger and bigger as I was talking. And I reflect back on that conversation all the time because I was like on cloud nine because I felt like we were making so much progress. And I was watching her face and she was like, "Holy shit, this girl is going to get her ass fired." And so it was tremendous hubris on my part to think that I could move that much, change that much, and not piss people off.
mm. So with that learning, what would you have done differently specifically? I mean, not just obviously go slower or do less, but how would you have approached it differently? And if someone is going into a big role with a lot of change to be made, but a lot of stakeholders, what should they think about?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I think the answer in that particular scenario would have been to go much slower, but that's not me. That's like not authentic to who I
yeah,
am.
yeah.
I would have died on the vine to go that slow, and it would have been too painful. And so I just had to rip the Band-Aid off. So I can look back and see what it would have taken for me to be successful. And I can also say that that wasn't me.
Yeah. Yeah. That
It wasn't
totally,
authentic to me.
yeah, that totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. So I want to go back to what you said earlier about growth as your drug of choice. I think I can relate to that. When you say that, what do you mean?
Ah, um, I am hooked on it. And in all aspects of my life, Tony, like I'm constantly stretching myself and my family and all of us. It's like, why? Why do I do this? I think you and I have had this conversation. Like, why? Where does this drive come from? Because it's relentless, whether it's constantly designing, remodeling, selling the house, moving on to the next house, or it's pushing myself from a career standpoint, bigger, bigger, better, better, from a financial standpoint, um, unenrolling my kids from school, traveling the world, like constantly challenging, challenging, challenging. I don't know. I just have always had this kind of growth mindset where I always just want to push myself. My dad is very much that way too. He's he's going to be 84 this year, and he is always challenging himself. He still has somebody that comes to the house to teach him Lightroom, and to teach him software products. So it's just like, it's wild to me. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just something I've always had inside of me ever
Yeah.
since I was a little kid.
Yeah. And so if you think about what at any organization you've been at, perhaps any situation, maybe describe a little bit of a situation where you are most proud of the work you did to drive growth and sort of take that superpower and that energy and put it to work for good and get the kind of results and outcomes you wanted. I'd love to hear like where's that, like what door did that go through where you're like, yes, we hit the S curve on this and
Yeah.
we went from here to there
Yeah.
and we got to the next level. What, maybe break that down for us a bit.
Yeah, I have several of them.
Yeah.
I'll tell you two if you want.
Sure.
They're both very different. So one was at Dell. It was actually with our good friend Zeke. I had taken over inside sales, which I felt had atrophied at the company. It was once the heartbeat of the company, and there was no one person running inside sales any longer. It was tucked under all these different organizations, under all these different GMs, and as a result, I felt like it wasn't being run as a true kind of center of competence, and the function was, as I said, atrophying. I put my hand up and said, "Hey, I think this is what can drive our growth if we centralize inside sales." And a woman by the name of Donna Troy, funny enough from IBM, that came to Dell, gave me the opportunity to do that. And first kind of, I want to say 60 days, we did a study of the organization, and we found that the average inside sales rep was 10 years older than their actual biological age. Their physical age was 10 years older. And that the average inside sales rep gained 15 to 20 pounds inside of their first month because they were tethered to the phones, they were sedentary, they were being metric to the minute, they were being fed junk food. And I knew this firsthand because that's how I started at Dell, and the same thing happened to me. And we had this assertion that simultaneously, I will say the sales function had also become reactive versus proactive. So the sales motion had become somewhat sedentary too, and it was mirroring what was happening to the reps physically. And we were wearing people out too. I mean, it was a grind. That job's a grind. And so we decided to do something very different. And Ziki was part of that team. And we decided, you know what? We are going to bring in trainers at all the different sites where we have critical mass and enable people to work out on our dime and on our time, which was like, that almost got me fired. The fact that we were going to let people off the phones to go work out was crazy talk because the GMs were already reluctant to give up this function to me in the first place. And then I was going to let them off the phones an hour a day. And they were going to lose that productivity. But the assertion was that we would gain the productivity if the people were healthier. And then the second part that we said is, look, if vendors are going to bring in food or we're going to bring in food, it's going to be real food. No more junk food. Like the running joke, the quote was no more cake balls because vendors were always bringing in things like cake balls. And I lost my mind one time.
Yeah.
It was like, no more cake balls.
Yeah.
And so we would bring in things like Whole Foods and Juice Land and different things and fresh fruit and real food. We didn't put people on a diet, but just real healthy foods. And something really incredible happened at the end of that year. Physically, we had people run marathons that didn't even know they were runners, and they were running sub 7-minute miles. We had a couple people lose over 100 pounds. We had countless people lose over 20 pounds. But that's not even the half of it. What happened from a business standpoint is the business grew 24% that year. It was a $6 billion P&L. And profitability improved by 45%.
Wow.
And Ziki was a part of that. And to this day, we called that Thrive. We called that organization Thrive. And to this day, when people work out at Dell, they copy me tag me on social media and put the hashtag Thrive on it. And Tony, that was 15 years ago, 14 years ago.
Yeah.
So that for me was one of the most rewarding things that we did that drove growth. And it was really just taking care of our people.
Yeah.
Making sure they felt good.
Yeah. I can't think of a better partner than Ziki to have on that mission.
Yeah, it was awesome.
For sure. So what do you think the reps did differently with that newfound energy and and probably mental clarity. Like, what did you see actually change in their day to day and their work? Obviously,
Yeah.
productivity, the results
Yeah.
and performance went up, but
Oh,
what changed? In
there's something else I didn't mention,
yeah,
which is really important. As people started to see us work out in the parking lot,
yeah,
people started to join. So other
mm,
functions started to join. So marketing started to join, operations started to join, finance started to join, all levels started to join. VPs, senior directors, directors, frontline managers, individual reps, people right out of college. And what we did not anticipate, Tony, is there is no title out on the track. There's no title in the gym. We all sweat the same. And so what happened is these relationships started to form cross-functionally and cross-title, where there were informal communication channels. So people started to build their networks that enabled them to fix problems, enabled them to address rumors. Um, so that was really wild. That was something we didn't anticipate. But then the other thing that we saw is people just started to enjoy work more. They started to have fun. They started to hit their number. They started to put more work into it. They started to be proactive. Now, of course, we supported them with sales training. We changed our methodology. We started to work with companies like Lattice at the time to help us be more targeted and give them propensity to buy scoring on their accounts. So we changed a lot more than just what I'm referring to around how we ran the business and how we enabled our sales teams. But we saw a lot of behavioral change.
yeah. I think it's incredible that you brought that up because that's what I was sort of wondering is what sort of unintended consequences or things that emerged through that, and the fact that you brought up that other departments and started to join.
Yeah,
Now it becomes sort of like one team, everyone in it together. You're building relationships cross-functionally,
yeah,
and everyone likes to talk about how important that alignment is, but how do you practically make that happen?
yeah,
And there's an example of how you did that. And then you're talking about them bringing a different kind of energy to the work. So when you are making these changes to training or to the territory models or to the data or lead scoring, they're actually going after it with a level of intensity that is making the most of those changes, right? So I think that's very, very cool. And if you think about this, so let's dig into this alignment thing a little bit, because I'm certain I can only imagine that, again, in all the experiences that you had, that you've had scenarios where that alignment is really strong, product marketing, sales, what have you, engineering, and weaker or stronger. Say more about, again, because there's a lot of lip service to this. Maybe I'd be interviewing a VP of sales or a CRO in an interview, and they'd be like, "Oh, I'm really great at driving alignment cross-functionally." And but how do you really do that? How have you done that over time? How have you breaking down those barriers?
yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna go to my second example
Yeah,
because it actually speaks to
yeah,
that, if it's okay.
yeah.
I joined National Instruments because the CEO was wanting to hire their first ever official CMO, and he was wanting to modernize the company, and he had a vision for rebranding the company. And I joined, and I was in my first kind of meeting where we were talking about what could be possible, and I was with my peers and the CEO. And I'll never forget it. The head of R&D pulled me aside. I hope he doesn't mind me telling this story, but he pulled me aside, and he was like, "You scare the bleep out of me." He's like, "Can I talk to you for a second?" And he's 6'7". I'm 5'3", and I was like, "Yes." And he pulls me into a room, and I can tell he's like flustered. And he's like, "You scare the bleep out of me." And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "I am so afraid that you're going to go out there and overpromise what I cannot deliver." And I looked at him, and I don't know what made me say this, Tony, but I just said, "Then come do the work with me." And he was like, "What?" And I was like, "Come do the work with me. Let's do the work together. Come meet with the agency. Come do all the work with me." And that led to us creating a core team, which included the CEO, the head of HR, the head of sales, the head of R&D. And then we had a couple people that we would rotate in and out. My head of brand, we had a couple of product GMs that we would rotate in and out. But the core team was really the executive leadership team. And we did the whole rebranding process together. And what I realized early on in the process is, whoa, this is not a rebrand. That would be like a skin, a veneer, but everything underneath would still be dated. This is like a true remod. Like, we can't paint the outside of the house if the whole house has like old plumbing, old wiring, old everything. We have to actually gut this thing, and it's going to require all of us and all of our functions to do it. And so what ended up happening is head of HR redid the values, head of R&D redid the products, head of sales redid the go-to-market motion. Um, we had a facilities, redid the facilities company. And then what happened at the company was so cool. People started, unintended consequence, people started hearing what we were doing and they started to join in. We were doing like focus groups to try and like share with people the direction that we were heading in. And I'll never forget it. These two young women stopped me in the hallway and they were like, Carla, we changed the packaging on this product. It used to be this big. Now it's this big. And we did it green, meaning it's all recyclable. And we reduced the amount of components. And now it's much cheaper to ship and it's much smaller and thinner profile. And it looks like this and it looks like the brand. And I was like, who told you to do this? And they were like, we came up with it. And it was so cool because people started to just come up with their own ways to help out. And that was not the culture before. It was a great culture before, but it was a culture of permission where everybody felt like they needed permission to go do something. And people just started to get bold and get empowered to do it with us. And we remodeled the whole company together. And that company, when I joined, was shrinking year over year. And when I left, was growing double digits, almost 30%. The P&L that I was running, I also was a GM there, was growing 30% when I left. And the company subsequently sold itself for a significant premium to the stock price. So really positive exit for everyone involved, including the board and shareholders. But that's one of probably my biggest success stories from a business standpoint. And it was done with a cross-functional team. And just to wrap a bow around that story, the first time I had a speaking engagement after I left the company, there was a team there of my old peers. There's a table there of my old team members, my old peers. And the head of R&D was there. And we kind of came up with this joke. We would do this in meetings. I'm sure you've done this before, but he gave me a word to sneak into my talk at this event. And so, I think it was banana. And so we were laughing about it at the table and they called my name to introduce me. And as I was starting to go up, he grabbed me by the shoulders and he was like, "Hey, Carla." And I said, "What?" And he goes, "I love you." And I was like, oh, this is why I work.
Yeah.
This is my reason for being. I would say growth and love are my drugs of choice,
Yeah.
And so that's probably the best, that along with what we did at Thrive, those are probably the best examples I have of cross-functional teamwork.
Yeah. I think those are great examples. And I also think it's a great example of the role that let's call it the revenue organization, wherever that sort of collectively lives, but identifying the right thing to do and doing it.
Yeah.
And when other people start joining in, you're doing the right thing and it's working.
Yeah.
I think sometimes culturally you see these silos of culture in a sense within a company. Like the sales team has a certain culture.
Yeah.
It's and then the engineering team has a different. And I've always felt that was a limiter to growth because people weren't really in it together. They had these. Not to say that maybe the engineering organization, the lights are a little dimmer, it's a little quieter. The sales floor is a little louder, a little more crazy, but. Fair enough, but not completely separate. Like this is the way we operate or set of values, and this is the way this other org operates. So it's cool to see you bring it together, even through a set of shared values around what change meant. How bold you were going to be. How you were going to invest your time, and you're winning when other people are joining in. To the race. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because sometimes the biggest levers for growth are not in sales and marketing. I'm a big proponent of make it easy to friggin' buy.
Yeah.
The easier it is to buy, the easier it is to spin up. One click, even if it's B2B, even if it's an enterprise sale. How hard is it to implement? There are a lot of people that touch these things. Engineering plays a big role. Operations plays a big role. Finance plays a big role. Legal plays a big role. If you can make it easy to buy, that is usually the lowest hanging fruit to growth.
Yeah. Yeah, bringing it back to where we started the conversation somewhat is if you're in a room talking about the way that you want to do things, your data, your metrics, your reporting up, staring at the decks together, you're not having that conversation outside in, which is, from the customer first, what's their experience like? How do we do a more buyer aligned process, right? Versus our internal, this is the way we want to see things. This is the data that matters to us, or the people that own us or run us. This is what they want to see. So I think that your predisposition to start with that conversation and that learning leads to the opportunity to figure out what it's going to take to achieve that.
Yeah. You know where I got empathy for that? As a CMO, because we were the target for so many people to sell to.
Oh, super interesting.
And so people were constantly
Yeah.
pitching to me. My LinkedIn was shut down. My inbox was shut down. It was getting flooded by emails from BDRs. And it was just, and then when I finally would say yes, somebody would come in and they would immediately start presenting to me and not ask me a single question. And it was so super triggering, Tony. And it got to the point where just wouldn't accept sales calls. I just wouldn't. And if we knew we wanted something, then we would go out to my peer set to understand who in the organization was using what was working, what was not. But I wouldn't take a single solitary sales call. And it's super fascinating because I've sat in board meetings for companies and they're like, our target is the CMO. I'm like, that's the wrong target. Everybody's targeting the CMO. That is the
Yeah.
wrong damn target.
Yeah.
The CMO is tired. The CMO has no time for your sales call.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I, just noticed is no one cared what I was worried about. No one asked me. I would have told them if they asked me. I would have given them the opportunity to understand what I needed and sell me what I actually needed, but no one asked.
Yeah.
In 10 years of being a CMO, no one asked me.
Yeah. It's such a massive opportunity that's missed, right?
Yeah.
That's crazy. Well, and then I want to go a little bit to, because we also talked about growth, your personal growth, and the work you do in the community, the work you do at the Aspen Institute and the Henry Crown Fellowship. What does that mean to you, all of that work? You've invested in that for a long time, maybe going on 7, 8, 9 years or so, if I'm getting that right. What do you spend your time on there, and why do you spend your time there?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking about
Yeah.
that. That changed my life. In 2016, I became a Henry Crown Fellow, and it changed my life. I talk about like gifts in my life. Moving to this country was a gift. My parents, me learning Spanish was a gift. The fact that my parents insisted that we spoke Spanish in the house. My children, and the Aspen Institute. It changed my life. And so today I am a Henry Crown Fellow, but I'm also a trustee on the board of the Aspen Institute, and I'm also a moderator with the Aspen Institute. And the Aspen Institute was created post-World War II to help avoid World War III. And the goal of the organization was to bring people together, to convene people across the political landscape. So cross-partisan, cross-geopolitical landscape. In fact, they held the last Israeli-Palestinian peace talks during the Clinton administration. And the goal is to keep people talking in service of peace and in service of a better world. And ever since I was a little kid, Tony, I have felt, the only way I can describe it is I have felt called to serve humanity. And that sounds kind of like a strange thing to say, but I have felt like deeply moved to help others in a really meaningful way. And especially in this polarized world that we live in, I feel very passionately about the fact that we must come together. We need to keep talking. And so I find that work extremely fulfilling. I give it a great deal of my time. Yeah, and it's changed my life. It's given me much more than I've given it.
In what ways does it stretch you?
Oof. Well, one of the big things is you're constantly in a room with people that don't necessarily think the same way. So they call us like-hearted but differently minded. So you get challenged all the fucking time. You get triggered. We talk about all the things you're not supposed to talk about, sex, politics, money, and it's hard. Their tears are shed sometimes. It's hard. It's confronting. But it's very worth it. I feel like I've grown so much as a human being, as a mom, as a wife, as a friend, as a result of it. And then my life has been enriched by it. The people that have come into my life have been amazing as a result.
Yeah, I'm sure there's incredible relationships there.
Yeah. Yeah. That I treasure and I protect fiercely.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And because it strikes me that for you to be as good as you can be at helping organizations grow, it kind of starts with your own personal growth and your own development. You just said that you get challenged in ways there that you wouldn't normally get challenged. And there's that sort of adage that you need tension to get growth.
Yeah.
Right. And so maybe say more about that. Like, how do you think about how you sort of keep up and run ahead and keep yourself in a condition to keep contributing at the level you want to contribute?
Well, you and I really this is something that you and I connect on big time. So I'm super into wellness. Um, I, as actually part of the Aspen Institute readings, one of the readings is called The Corporate Athlete, the HBR article that I think I
Yeah.
sent to you after our first walk. And the premise of The Corporate Athlete is that in order to operate as at your best as an executive, you have to have you have to treat yourself like an athlete, like an Olympian would or a professional athlete would. And most executives have the fitness part dialed in. They're focused on that, but it's more than that. It is mind, it is body, it is so mind being emotional, mental health, body, um, spirit. So having something that's bigger than yourself. So it can be religious or it can not. It could be nature. It could be a philanthropic practice. It could be meditation, but something that takes you out of yourself and is bigger than you are, that anchors you to something bigger. And then the other thing the article talks about is rest, oscillation between kind of like um, times of kind of high strain and rest, which athletes really get, but executives don't always, and that's what can lead to burnout.
Yeah.
So that's something that I've really taken to heart, and man, I've tested every modality under the sun. I really focus on my fitness, on my nutrition, on my overall mental and emotional health. I've been on every sort of retreat under the sun, um, in an effort to really be my best self.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's super compelling because anytime I see something going awry in an organization, obviously my eyes very quickly raise to the top of that, top of that org chart and the leader there, and what conditions are they setting? What talk are they walking? How are they carrying themselves? And so it's so important how you're able to show up and manage your own emotions, grow your own skill set in some ways, right? If you want to be more curious or be better at asking questions that get to the root of, that's all a practice at the end
Yeah.
of the day, and being more present. Like even for today, I took 20 minutes, very intense, on a stair climber at the gym right before I got here. And I took 20 grams of protein or of creatine about an hour before that because I'd struggled with some sleep last night. It's been like a super intense week. I started the morning super early and I was like, I need to do a couple of things to dial myself in because I need to be totally present with
Wow.
Carla. But I know if I move my body, if I change
Yeah.
my body, I'm going to change my mind.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of studies right now saying that on a night of any sleep deprivation or some intense travel, if you take 15 to 20 grams of creatine, you might even operate at a better level than you would
Yeah.
have otherwise. So I took some, even at the risk that I may have some stomach issues. So
Oh yeah, that will happen. That does happen to me because when you said that, I was like, ooh, that
No,
would
I'm
create
good.
that might
I'm
create
good.
issues for me. But we need to compare
Yeah,
notes because you
yeah.
look amazing,
Okay.
and I definitely want to compare notes on this. But
Yeah.
yeah, I had an hour and a half with Zeppelin this morning. We walked the trail,
Yeah.
but I too always work out before a podcast. I always make
Yeah.
sure I'm hydrated. I always make sure I eat well. I burn a ton of calories during a podcast, which is super fascinating. Do you know your brain is what burns the most calories? Did you know
I've
that?
heard something like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so I'm always starving after these things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I too am really big into that. You know what I'll also share with you, Tony, if I could be honest?
Yeah.
There were a couple parts that I was not good at and that were breaking down and that led to my burnout, which I figured out later in life. And one was the emotional. So I had disconnected myself from my emotions to survive. So I was kind of operating from here up because I thought that was the professional thing to do, especially as a woman. You don't want to be the person that like loses your mind in the room. And but what I didn't realize is I kind of completely cut myself off from my heart, and that was starting to have an impact on my relationships, not just at work but outside of work. And it was also impeding my ability to make good decisions because you need emotions to make decisions. And so that work I came into probably about 7 years ago. And that was really a big inflection point for me in my career. As soon as I tapped into that, that's when my career really took off and when I really started to do some of my best work.
That's amazing. Yeah. When you see those opportunities to improve. So now as you're in your current role, we've talked about some scenarios and examples of where you've been able to instigate growth, catalyze growth, do the transformation that's necessary. I'm curious, well, two things. One, give me an example of where where you just didn't get there. It just didn't happen and fell flat. And I think you talked a little bit at IBM. You probably didn't have enough time to
Yeah.
flow that all the way through,
Yeah.
and maybe perhaps you maybe took on too much too fast, and that's fair enough. But a time where you had an opportunity to flow it all the way through, and you're like, that didn't work,
Yeah.
and what you kind of learned
I
from
mean,
that.
that was it. That was the
Yeah,
big heartbreak,
yeah,
right? The opportunity is so great. What an innovative company. What an amazing company. The fact that I didn't get to take that message to the world was super frustrating.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, that was it. I failed. And it was tough, you know, and it was heartbreaking. I experienced real heartbreak over that one, because I could see what was possible. But the reality is, from a change management standpoint, like I said, I had tremendous hubris, and I, you know, was too fast and too bold.
yeah, yeah. No, that's fair enough. So now, if you take your current role that you're playing with CoEffect and helping these executives, individuals, and companies, what do you think is going to be most important for you to get right, dial in, work on, contribute, for you to get the body of work you're trying to get done and changing some of the growth trajectory of these companies and ultimately of the people and the teams? What is it that you're working on the most to kind of get the unlocks? And I
Yeah.
know it's probably a little tuned to each organization, but at the highest level, how do you think about the next body of work and what's important for you to do
Yeah,
to help?
it's disrupting toxicity in the workplace. And I'm seeing massive unlocks for the people that I'm working with. And there's like a set of limiting beliefs that you have to do things a certain way or buy into certain things that you just don't have to. And it's unlocking amazing performance in these people. Um, and they're becoming fully authentic. They're becoming really clear. They're becoming direct communicators. Doesn't mean you won't have conflict. Conflict is fine. Healthy conflict is fantastic. Every family has great conflict, but it just means that there's a there's real meaning there in the work. There's real connection to it. But yeah, disrupting toxicity. That's the big unlock.
Yeah.
And then I think the other one, Tony, is I am taking a unique approach to the way in which I'm coaching people. Like, on one hand, I have 25 years of experience in go-to-market and turning around businesses and growing businesses, and running significant P&Ls and leading large organizations around the globe. So I can go deep with folks in terms of strategies and how to move the market and how to build the best team. But we start with the underpinnings, which is the corporate athlete approach, which is, okay, how's your health? Let's do a baseline assessment of that. What are your practices for your mental health? What sort of practices do you have that take you outside of yourself? And what does your rest look like? And while I don't pretend to be a doctor or a therapist, I'm not that. I see myself as more of a curator than a coach. So based on what each individual, where they are in their journey, I can kind of see, ooh, when I was there, this is what I employed, and bringing in the right resources to support them, has been really, really beneficial to these individuals.
More of a curator than a coach.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so give me an example of that, like what that looks like when that's happening.
Yeah. Um, well, for example, all of the people that I work with start with a baseline health assessment. Either they already work with a functional MD, or they've done an executive physical, or they'll do function health. Because what we want to make sure is that everything is okay. And that everything is in working order. There's nothing because that can impact your performance. If your hormones are out of whack, if your thyroid's off, if your cortisol's through the roof, if you've got some underlying issue, it can affect how you feel, and it's going to affect how you perform in the
Mm.
workplace. Same with the mental emotional. I've had folks that I've seen patterns in them where I'm like, oof, this seems deeply rooted. They're coming over and over, and I'm like, okay, are you working with a therapist on this? Have you considered the Hoffman Institute? So again, I don't pretend to play therapist, but identify things where folks could be potentially undermining themselves, and then we see big unlocks. Um, one of the most basic ones is I had an individual who, I asked him how he was sleeping, and he was like, "I get great sleep. I sleep 8 to 9 hours a night." I was like, "Oh wow, that's really impressive." And I was like, "Are you using a wearable?" And he was like, "No." And I was like, "So do you know what the quality of that sleep is?" And he was like, "No." And sure enough, he got a wearable. I didn't even ask him to get one. And in our next meeting, I saw him and he was wearing a Whoop. And I was like, so how's that sleep quality? And he was like, damn you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting 30 minutes of deep sleep. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, there it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just because you're getting enough sleep doesn't mean you're getting good sleep.
Yeah.
And we made some tweaks. He improved his sleep. It did wonders for his anxiety.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it just like little things like that.
Yeah. No, I think that's brilliant. And I'm pretty sure that some of that intuition on that comes from when you've run large organizations at scale and driving revenue and growth, you realize the importance of actually measuring where you are,
Yeah.
and because you can not be exactly where you think you are very
Yeah.
easily. And that's very well documented in personal health and with diets and everything else. You're very close to that. So maybe on that topic is what have you learned and what do you sort of point people to when it comes to measurement, KPIs, like how to drive performance with those things? Like, what do you focus on and what do you not focus on? That might be, I had a mentor friend who used to call him sort of metrics mirage. Like it can also set you a little off path too. But I'm curious because for certain, everyone listening to this podcast is spending a lot of time staring at data, and a lot of time staring
Yeah.
at those slides
Like,
that have been
what's the wrong
created.
data,
Yeah,
basically?
yeah. What's your when you're in an organization, how do you use data to uh, to get the results that you want, but how do you make sure that it's not going to lead to the wrong conclusions or maybe the wrong approaches? Sort of what have you learned about how to use data in the process?
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me say this: activity does not equal impact. So more activity does not mean more revenue or more profitable growth. I'm big on return on investment. I'm big on path of least resistance. I feel like lead gen is one of the lowest converting, lowest revenue generating activities that you can do if done in the way in which it's been done for the last 20 plus years. Buying leads is a horrible practice. And so now with AI, all these things are changing. I actually think some really interesting stuff is happening with things like Clay. But I would say I see so many organizations waste time thinking that activity equals impact. Whether it's marketing organizations, whether it's sales organizations, more. Let's do more events. Let's do more webinars. Let's get more leads. Let's do more of this, more of that. And there's just a complete lack of strategy, lack of clarity in terms of where the growth is going to actually come from, lack of alignment. Sometimes you can just pick three things, and if everyone goes after it, you're golden.
Yeah. Well, maybe that same thread is again what we discussed earlier, which is a little bit of that old way of thinking that activity is going to solve all problems, and it's also the least sophisticated thing to focus on, right? Because you can sort of muscle it there. So it's this way of like, well, that's how it's always been. And I've walked into an organization where the company was missing its forecast by 30 or 40% and panicked about it. So the organization had gone from one forecast call a week to four, and I was
Like
like,
they could
really?
stare it up and to the right.
Well, yeah, literally, I was like, so this is the equivalent of like, I want to make more money, so I'm just going to stare at my pay stub
Yeah.
every day, and that's how I'm going
Yeah.
to go make
Stare
more
at the bank
money.
account.
Yeah, what if we actually went and figured out what we could do different, more or better, or different or better,
Yeah.
and that would contribute to that rather than just staring at the W-2.
Yeah.
And so, but again, it's this classic thing when we sort of grip harder, right?
Yeah.
It's that whole analogy of when you're it's the someone on the golf course or at Top Golf, you slice it, and what do? You just grip harder, right?
Yeah.
And so that's something that I see a lot in organizations, and that's a version,
Totally.
I think, of what you're describing.
Yeah. That's kind of the old way
Yeah,
of doing
yeah,
things. When I was in the bar business, I used to turn around restaurants and bars. So about the time that you were coaching, I was running restaurants and bars. And the first thing that I would do when I would come in is I would want to shadow every position. So I'd shadow the door, I'd shadow the kitchen, I'd shadow the bar backs. In one instance, the brewer, um, the accountant, the managers. I shadowed everybody, cocktail waitresses. And by the end of that, I had the answer. I typically knew what needed to be done. And it was really interesting because no one ever thought to do it. And all the while being exposed to customers, all the while, right? Just through different lenses. I love what Walmart used to do. When their numbers were down, they used to cancel all their meetings and send their execs into the stores. What if every
yeah,
business operated that way?
yeah. not get in a room and start the numbers more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's going to magically make the pipeline appear.
Well, I did
or
have,
convert.
yeah, I had a mentor of mine that had this model that I really loved, and I've tried to take it to every place I've been. Is sort of, you kind of start with challenging assumptions, and I think that's a version of what you're describing, right? Ask questions, challenge assumptions. We all think we do that every day, right? But does this really need to be this way, or is this the right thing, or should we be doing something else? And then you try something different inevitably. But the thing that most people, I think, get wrong, because there's also this, the culture of like, fail fast, fail harder, it leads you to challenging assumptions, trying something different, but then you prove why it isn't working versus prove why it is working.
Yeah.
And so that is, I think, the one little unlock, and once you've done that and using the data to do that, and versus the opposite. So the equivalent of going to the gym or working on your body composition or health is, you decide you're going to get more fit and more healthy, and you're going to get down to 16% body fat or whatever, which for me would be monumental. But you basically, I'm going to go to the gym. I come back day one, I look in the mirror, no change.
Yeah.
Back day two, no change, right? Of course,
Yeah.
30 days later, still maybe no change.
Yeah.
So the question is, at what point along the way do I just bail on the program, bail on the diet I was on?
Because
Or
you're
do
disenfranchised.
Yeah. Or am I like, no, what is working about this? And maybe it's going to take 90 or 180 days to get there. But I've just seen that way too often, is the next initiative, the next fire, the next urgent thing hits the desk. And that great PowerPoint that said we need to go do this thing all of a sudden becomes completely forgotten about. And we started doing a thing, and now we're off to the next thing. And we're like, well, look at the data. Nothing's really happening here yet, but we haven't given it enough time to come to fruition.
That's such a great point, Tony, because I think sometimes when things feel broken or numbers aren't being hit, a leader will come in and assume that something needs to be fixed, something needs to be changed. But it's very seldom do people ask the question, what's going well, so that we can lean into that, because that's a lot easier than fixing something. And so one of the things, I just joined a board of a company, and one of the things I asked the CEO and everybody that I met with is, I was like, what's going great? And what do I need to not mess with? Like, what is going really great, and what can we lean into? Because you're absolutely right. And I think also, just individually, I know myself, I'm really hard on myself, and so I'm constantly trying to optimize. How can I get better? How can I get stronger? How can I get more lean? How can I get, versus like acknowledging, wait a minute, I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. And we'll start to, maybe there's a couple questions and we can start to wrap up, but I had this ending question that I was thinking about, of course, going to ask you, but what my own response to this would be. But if a founder or CEO came to you tomorrow and said, I'm stuck, what's the one question you'd ask them first? And interestingly enough, the thing that came to mind for me is, what's working? like so that you could double down on what's working, not what isn't working, which might be the initial question. Like, let's get to the problem. Why are you stuck? It's like, maybe you're not stuck at all. You're just not seeing. And so I'm curious, that's one way of answering it. But on that question itself, if you do get into a new engagement, with the CEO or an executive team, and they're stuck, and what is the initial process that you like to go through to identify, and do the listening and learning that you talk about?
I love the way you're thinking about it. I think mine is not too different, in that mine would be, what makes you say you're stuck? What's the actual feeling? And drilling down, and what's the feeling underneath that? And what's the feeling underneath that? What's really going on? Because typically what happens is, oh, you're not stuck, you're overwhelmed. Or you're not stuck, you're afraid. Or you're not stuck, you're pissed. Or you're not stuck. There's typically something underneath it.
Yeah.
What's really going on? And because typically overwhelm or stuckness is the avoidance of a feeling. And I've learned that through the work that I've been doing with my own coach, and through a lot of the emotional work that I've done. And so if you keep pulling the thread, if you keep going deeper and deeper and deeper, usually they uncover what it is that's standing in the way.
Yeah. Great. I love that. Well, last question here. Just you mentioned earlier that the way that you all used AI at IBM when you were in there to cultivate insights from the organization. You talked a little bit about, some other potential uses of AI. But of course, this is a very important topic. If you were walking into the next job tomorrow, and based on just where you see the world is at, what would you lean into the most around that technology and the tools that are available? Where do you see the biggest promise early here? How would you think about where and how to deploy AI in an organization at this point? And that's kind of a broad question, but where would you start first, and how do you think about that?
Well, I can tell you where I'm seeing companies have the most success with it. And that's when they're creating cultures where everybody plays in it. because the more people understand it, the more people realize that it's a tool, and the innovation actually comes not from me, but from the organization and not from the leaders. It's the CS rep that's like, wait a minute, I can do this. Wait a minute, then I can do the job of 4 CS reps with this. Or it's the chief of staff that's like, wait a minute, I'm not spending all my time building decks anymore. I can actually look at some other processes. Or wait, there are all these tools out there that can make our targeting so much better and our data so much richer. And our sales organization is now significantly more enabled. But what I'm really finding, and I'm actually coaching at an AI company right now, and I asked the CEO this question, like, where should I lean in? Like, I want to make sure I stay relevant, and he was like, just play. And he sent me a list of all these different tools. And he was like, and that creativity will unlock. The ideas will come to you. And so for me, it would be building an organization where people are playing in it, they're sharing with each other what they're learning. One of the things that we used to do at Rackspace is we used to have hackathons, but it wasn't just in the software engineering organization. It was in other organizations. We would take problems and we would actually pull all-nighters, and people would wear their pajamas, and we'd order pizza and we'd go figure it out and tackle it. And it was super fun. It was a cultural thing. And so I would take the same approach with AI, and let the innovation come from the organization itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because things are changing so fast and things are popping up overnight. How about you? How would you answer that question? Especially based on what you're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love the way you've answered it. And the thing that I'm most focused on right now is allowing organizations to use AI to directly handle opportunity that they just wouldn't even be able to get to. And I'm less focused as an organization just because of the choice of where and how we spend our time and where we want to add value and how it improves productivity of individuals or automation of individuals' work. I'm more focused on raising overall productivity, revenue per employee at the organizational level. But I would say generally, I'm seeing two things. One is, and I'm hearing a lot of this feedback from especially technical leaders, where let's say there's a camp of 30% of the team is all in, playing, using it. 30% of the team is skeptical, like conspiracy theory, don't want to put my data there. And 30% of the team is still asleep at the wheel and not really aware of what's going on, which is not surprising to me because, again, one of those things we have to turn and change in the mindset and the culture is, I was at an organization, for example, that spent a lot of money on an auto dialing tool to basically put in front of all the whole inside sales team so that we could automate all of the hard parts about reaching customers, right? We're going to literally clean and stage leads and load them into the system, and this system will auto dial all the things. And you just sit there and talk. Like, isn't this amazing? And then I called the head of revenue operations, 2 or 3 months in. I'm like, hey, how's the implementation going that we just spent all this money on and all this time implementing? We've got 30% adoption. I said, what? 30% adoption. I have to rethink my whole life. How is this possible? And he's like, well, the first time we loaded the data was off and it was wrong. And, so then like a 30% didn't log back in. And well, these other people just really liked the way we were doing it before. And well, the other 30%, they don't really actually want to talk to people,
Yeah, totally.
I was like,
you're like, why are they in sales? Yeah.
So I think, look, I sort of taken a little more realistic approach to, like the fact that it is a change management process for the people as well.
Yeah.
And I think that is its own cycle and process that we have to figure out how to inspire and motivate and show people the path and the way. So I'm looking for opportunities where I can bypass some of that change management and make progress, if you will, in the early wins, early days. And then I think the other thing is like progress over perfection, right? So a lot of people can get hung up on like where things actually, how well it works or doesn't work. And that's kind of not the point. The point is there's progress in this and there's things that you can do really well and there's things where there's limitations. So I do think it's still a mindset shift and it's change management even in and of itself. So again, not a surprise as a revenue leader. It's like my whole career has been basically that. But when I basically said we could automate away the whole hard part of all this process and still only get 30% adoption, now I'm for it,
I mean, it's classic change management. 30-30-30 has been change management from the beginning of time. But you know what I love about what you said? And I was talking to another AI company about this because I feel like all these companies are taking this message I shouldn't say all these companies. Many companies are taking this message to the market of, oh, you can reduce your people cost by X. We can take out X thousands of jobs from your back office. That is the worst possible message.
Yeah.
First of all, it's so disconnected People are fearful.
Yeah.
And it's also so short-sighted. To your point, this is a productivity enhancer.
Yeah.
So this is 1 + 1 = 5.
Yeah.
And by the way, the AI doesn't work without us. Like, you need human engagement with it.
Yeah.
So I love what you just said about, you're looking at it a different way. It's not, it's as a productivity enhancer.
Yeah.
And how do you scale productivity through it?
Well, this has been amazing. I feel like we could just keep going on and on and on.
I know.
Like we
You
always
and I
do
could
on
riff
our walks.
forever.
Yeah. And also go deeper and deeper and deeper. That's the important point. But I probably have to sign up for an engagement to do that. So, which I'd be totally happy to do. We should talk about. But I just really appreciate you spending the time on this and supporting this conversation. And I think it's really important, the work that you're doing out in the world and this personal mission that you have. And I'm so happy for you that you get to fully deploy that, because in an organization, inevitably there'll be shackles on, I think, fully deploying what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
I think now you get to be free, run free and do that. So I love that for you.
Yeah. Well, I'm super honored that you had me on, and I have so much respect for your big brain, and I've always loved our conversation. So thank you.
Amazing. All right. Thank you. Join the Revenue Dilemma conversation. Hit subscribe, share, and like everywhere you listen. It's time we solve the revenue dilemma once and for all.